What made you believe other people are experiencing a different version of reality? I was leaving a job site, residential renovation, one day, loading up my tools into my big military style backpack, because I was riding my 2007 CBR 600RR, when this slick black BMW rolled up the driveway. The mom was driving, and her son was in the passenger seat, but I had heard from my boss that the BMW belonged to the kid. He just couldn't drive yet. Anyways, they parked, and he came running up to me, gushing about my bike. Then he says, "Man, that is sick. How did you get your parents to buy you one? They'd never get me one." I told him I worked my butt off and bought it all on my own. I'll never forget how he looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Oh man, that really sucks. I hope I never have to do that." Really made me realize that some people are playing a completely different game than the rest of us. I'm a writer, and I was talking with my writer friends about our process. I said I need to have a mind movie running of the scene I want to write, and only then I can write fast. I thought everyone had that going, but no, they were literally like, "You have a what now?" A writer friend simply can't visualize anything, and has to Google for images that make her feel like her story, so she can write more intensely. Another has such a vivid visual mind that she sees everything in 4K resolution, and even all the details in the background are super clear to her. It's funny how we all perceive the world in different ways and somehow manage to convey that in words. So much this. I never understood people who made Pinterest boards or cast their characters with actors or used other visual aids. I genuinely thought it was a waste of time or some trendy writer aesthetic that just distracts writers from actually writing. Then I found out not everyone sees images in their head, and having that stuff is actually very helpful to their process. I can barely even use reference photos. When I try to, I tend to get bogged down in the details, and it completely curtails my creativity. The fact that other people don't see a complete scene set in their head that they can then just transfer to paper is wild to me. Mind movie is the perfect way to describe it. When I was about 20, 5 friends and I went to a party. Alcohol was consumed. People started making out, flirting with each other's partners, generally acting like horny 20-year-olds. We all ended up mad at each other. We decided to write our versions of what happened and share them with each other. They were all completely different. What we saw, what we heard, all of us were in the same place at the same time, and our experiences were so different. It made me distrust history and memory. Our lives are a story we tell ourselves. That's all. Tell yourself a good story. My mother would abuse me when I was home alone with her. She was always very careful about it. Think ear pulling, hitting me where my hair would cover any bruises, and pinching my butt where my underwear would cover. There were nights where she would pull a chair into the middle of my bedroom, turn the breaker off, and force me to sit in the dark staring at the wall without any food, water, or the ability to go to the bathroom. Then she'd hear my dad pull into the driveway from his night classes, cough up some fake tears, run to turn the breaker on, and tell him that I'd been out of control and horrible to her all evening. He'd then punish me on top of what she'd done. In my late teens, I finally broke down and told him about her abuse. Even though she'd done everything she could to hide it, he demanded to know what I'd done to deserve her to act that way. He treated me like I'd punch her first then get mad when she punched me back, even though that was absolutely not the case. He then went and talked to her and believed her when she said I was a pathological liar. I've had 5 different doctors diagnose me with PTSD. If you ask him, I'm so severely mentally ill that I made the whole thing up for attention. I'm so desperate for attention that I refuse to talk to either of them, and have cut out my entire biological family, changed my name because I want nothing to do with them, and made my own very content life while they drink themselves to death because of my lies. My wife and I were taking an Uber somewhere, and we were going along the Intercoastal Waterway, a huge body of water that goes up a good chunk of the east side of FL. The Uber driver gestures to it and says whoever designed this did a really good job of making it flat. It was the most bewildering comment I've ever heard, and I don't know which aspect is crazier, that he thought someone built it, or that he had no idea how fluids work. I was out with an ex at an event. There was an open mic for questions at the end of the event, and she stepped in line to ask a question. There were maybe 10 people in line, and she was number 4. After about 3 questions, they said that was it. She was next up to speak, but didn't get a chance. From my perspective, it was obvious that the guest speaker, who was in his late 80s, was tired and didn't want to answer any more questions. From her perspective, it was a vast conspiracy by the patriarchy. She just kept grabbing more and more circumstantial evidence to build a grand conspiracy theory where the announcer and the speaker and the event organizers and even the people in front of her in line were in league to prevent her from speaking, to stifle her voice. It was just insane. Watching essentially a non-event spun into a huge, evil plan wherein she was the heroine and the forces of darkness were arrayed against her. It made me start to question every story she'd ever told me. How many of the events in her history, as she'd recounted to me, where she was a victim who was abused and traumatized, were actually totally normal events, where things simply didn't go her way. I just couldn't trust her after that. She had her own version of reality. I once had a job that involved being around rich people, and when I say rich, I say rich. At the beginning I was just it's just a job. Let's do it. But the more I was with these people, the more I realized how low middle class 22 meters, diverged with them on so many views of life. They seem to live above all problems and responsibilities of the world, and I think that a lot has to do with the parties and conventions they held up, the divertimentos that they lived every day, and the zero FCKS they gave, or at least, that was the feeling that they transmitted about the real problems of the world. While I was struggling with daily economy and had to be supported by my mom, their problems were that they were afraid that the dresses they bought in their trip won't fit in the 2 suitcases they brought for that purpose. Of course I'm generalizing, but that made me realize how dangerous it is to become rich without a basis of moral and social awareness. Not a personal encounter, but I just stumbled across a conspiracy community on Twitter today. Anyone heard of targeted individuals? These people, who are most likely paranoid schizophrenics, think some secret world power is trying to mind control random people around the world with microwaves and other electronic and sound waves. They claim they are in constant pain and have all sorts of illnesses because of this. They also claim they are being followed by gang stalkers, who are also random citizens, or just the CIA/FBI, being paid to follow and survey the people who are being bombarded with these government microwaves. They believe their neighbors and strangers and even family members are all in on this conspiracy against them. Most of these targeted individuals also hear voices and see spirits. They think random passers by are whispering things to them like warnings. They see demons and spirits hidden in objects. In their online communities they encourage each other to not seek medical advice or help because doctors and psychologists will just tell them they have a mental illness and make them take pills to further brainwash them/keep them quiet. And also these microwaves implant microscopic trackers in their skin while they sleep. Any sort of bug bite or bump is proof of a new implanted tracking device. Some of these people waste away in their homes, too afraid to eat, and then blame their illnesses from anorexia on the microwaves. Most can't keep their jobs, and there have been a few instances of these people committing mass shootings because of their delusions. Among these mass shooters is a doctor and a marine. There's also a psych doctor who writes about gang stalkers and has not lost his license. This seems to be happening all around the world in different cultures, from lawyers and businessmen to average middle class people. In the 90s, I was fresh out of the Navy, living with my mom for a while, and the house we were renting had a pool. I noticed that the diving board was bolted to the concrete with 2 bolts. One was rusted all the way through, and the other was about halfway rusted through. I told my mom about it. Obviously unsafe, right? Her response was, "It hasn't broken yet. It's not going to." My first major failure on a project in my professional career happened almost 2 decades ago. My boss had done all of the foundational work for a major project. He told me I'd be the lead engineer on the project, and pending successful completion I would get a promotion. This was my test. Early on, I discovered that most of the foundational work didn't actually work. The project became a nightmare and my boss became overbearing, aggressive, and honestly scary. I had consultants telling me to do X, Y, Z or I might as well resign because the project had no hope of success. I put together proposals for X, Y, and Z, and my boss shot it down and reprimanded me for questioning him. I started putting in extra hours, doing research after hours, designing alternatives, testing everything. One day I tested something new, and it worked. I was in shock. I made several hundred prototypes, testing each one multiple times, and everything passed. I quickly shipped them out and notified our customer that prototypes were headed their way. I was notified a week later that every single one of them failed. The project was cancelled and my boss was fired. I had saved a few prototypes, so I went back and tested them. Pass every time. I couldn't figure it out. My boss reached out a few weeks after he was let go and we met for lunch. I asked him what actually happened. He explained his side of the story, that his job was on the line and he didn't want to leave his livelihood in my hands. He had paralleled what I was doing on his own and panicked when he saw that I had sent out parts, thinking I was sabotaging him for some reason. He went in on second shift, ran his own parts with a faulty process, and then threw mine in the garbage before they could be shipped out. It was an epiphany for me, because looking at it from his perspective filled in a lot of puzzle pieces for oddities that had occurred over the previous year. It's a testament to the old adage, no matter how good of a person you think you are, you're the bad guy in someone's story.